Hi Lisa, can you talk more about what experience you had leading up to your non-dual awakening? I found to think about aware of things that are commonly uncomfortable for people to think about, like an afterlife, aliens, slavery and war, much easier after I lost my fears for survival and others, etc. So why are you thinking about the afterlife and aliens and slavery and all those things? This is most probably something psychological and not to do with non-duality. And when I say it's something psychological, I mean that it's to do something that you're going through psychologically at the moment. It's hard to put into words. So it's like you're having fears or doubts or problems in your mind, and so your mind is taking it to the most extreme. And in one way, these things can be good to contemplate, to open up your mind and open up doors to different ways of thinking. But if you're repetitively thinking about it, then it's most probably a feeling of you, of helplessness, and then it imagines all these things that it's helpless about, and it encourages that feeling and encourages that thought pattern, and the mind keeps repeating that thought pattern. So every time it happens, just recognize it, recognize the feeling of helplessness, acknowledge where it is in the body, and see that it's not true, that who you are isn't that you are presence, and that that's not beneficial to you, and just let it go. Or let it be there, but see that it's not true, not true, not true. The problem with these thoughts and feelings is the belief in some way that they're true, and they have truth. And it's like the person gets sucked into them and believes their reality. So the experience is I was very lucky, or lucky is maybe not a right word because I don't believe in luck as such. It just is the karma, the play of things, it's just the energy. But my energy seeked this subject very young, and it suffered very young. And so in Buddhism they say the first realization that you have to have is that life is suffering, and I really realized that. I really saw so much suffering as a child, mental and physical suffering. I watched a lot of it happen outside of me. There was a lot of illness in my family, and so I really got to see another dimension than what my friends saw. And because our society doesn't acknowledge it and just sees it as dark and bad, it's like I really recognized this dark side of life, this darkness, and it really affected me. It really had such a big effect on me. I didn't know what to do with it. And so what it did was it led me to ask bigger questions than a lot of my peers. My peers were just looking for the next pleasure, for the next thing that society told them. And I was like, hang on, I have to know why I'm alive. I cannot make any choices when I don't know why I'm alive. And to me, I thought that my peers were crazy, that they could just do the regular and not ask questions. But actually I see it was because at such a young age, I couldn't do anything else. I couldn't cope. Having seen that much, I had to ask questions about it. And I was so dedicated to it, so dedicated, that I just gave up everything for it. And I was really lucky because, you know, as you get older, you accumulate things and you get things. And I had nothing that I'd got really. I began to be quite successful at theatre writing. I was a playwright, and I began to be quite successful and make a name for myself and make lots of contacts. And I also, well, I suppose I did have actually quite a lot of things. I had a house, and I suppose I did, but for some reason my brain didn't see them as a lot of things. I had a lot of opportunities, I suppose, but I just wasn't interested. I was interested in theatre writing, but the thing about theatre writing is it seemed to me similar to spirituality, because in theatre writing it was like I was emotionally releasing. I was understanding the stories inside of me. I could see by what I was writing and the way in which I'm writing, I could see what was happening in my body, my mechanism. And also I was reading books like, I forget the name of them, but I was reading this series of books. They were a trilogy all about emotional release through writing. So when I was writing my theatre plays, it was like an emotional release. It was like the stories I was stuck in my brain, I was kind of writing them into theatre. And I think that's why people liked and why my plays did well, was because they came really from my heart and they were so raw. And I think that was unique about them. But luckily I didn't feel like I was giving that up. Now when I look back, I realise I really gave it up. Like, at the time I didn't really realise that. So I just gave up everything. I saw that my life wasn't worth anything if I just pursued the material, because internally I would be suffering. And I realised that my internal state was more important than the external things that I collected and my achievements. And so I was lucky that I went and really, really dived into seeking spiritually or non-duality. And I fell in love with non-duality, and I listened to it, and I had recognitions and I had awakenings, but I still felt uncomfortable internally. I still felt emotionally disturbed. I felt overwhelmed by things. I felt uncomfortable. Even though I'd had profound realizations and really saw very clearly who I was, there was still this energetic involvement in personhood, and that seemed to take many years of emotionally releasing, of understanding my energetical body, massage, therapy, all these different things. But I was so dedicated. Everything was about that. Everything I did was about that. And I meditated and everything. And I was just so eager to jump into everything. I was so eager to feel and to really go beyond. And eventually something snapped. And it wasn't for me. It was like an energetic thing that happened. I was sitting there, and it was at the moment that there was no spirituality, but I'd just been through a lot of loss, a lot of things like I'd had to let go of again. And I'd done that many times in my past. I was 30 and there was a lot of things I once again had to let go of. But this time was different. It's like it was the same. So even though there were a lot of things I was letting go of, it was the same I am no matter where I went. It was the same presence. So even though there were things that were missing, it was the same presence. There was the same sense of aliveness. There was the same base. And then when I was sitting in a cafe not thinking about anything, this break began to happen where that presence stopped being inside of me. And it felt like it was going out of my eyes into the room. And then this energetic shift happened. And it changed everything. And it changed the person a lot, but there's still emotional release that I do. There's still conditioning that needs adjusting. But it did change a lot on the human level. But there was just like a break, that happened, where the human was no longer the experiencer. And it was just really, really clear, without a doubt. But it wasn't for me, it wasn't for the person, it just was the way it was. And it felt like love. Presence was love. Suddenly love was everywhere, reflected everywhere, and was everything. And that was a huge awakening. Maybe it was, we could just call it an awakening. And then since then, there's been more and more over time, the integration on the personal level to that. It did change a lot on the personal level. Like instantly it changed a lot, but it's still, and there's still an understanding of what happened. And it was funny, when I started speaking, I never intended to be a teacher. It was like, I had begun to teach, but more it was like an expression of joy. And still sometimes it's a little confusing, because I understand that that's the role I am to most people, but it's also like an expression of joy. But then after now doing it for so many years, I also realize on the personal level I have to teach to an extent, because I've seen so many people fall into this hopelessness with non-duality, and that's not what non-duality is meant to be about. Non-duality is love, but it's like people take on non-duality and they become hopeless with it. They try to, they believe I am nothing, which is really destructive on the personal level, to believe you're nothing. And they've had a trauma as a child, feeling that they're nothing or not important, and then they take that thought and add it to that, and they just keep repeating that trauma, and they don't see beyond it. So on the human level, on the teaching level, I've had to, there's two different ways in which I speak. There is speaking about non-duality, which is a joy to express, and then there's the speaking about the person, which is a joy to express, but it's not like speaking about non-duality. Non-duality is my true passion. But I see that as a way, when you're speaking about it, you have to speak about both. You have to stop the person falling into a pit of despair and hopelessness, because that's a lot of the time what the tendency of the person does when it begins to see that there is nothing in the world but fulfill it. Before, it believes the objects will fulfill it. I will get there, and then when it begins to see it won't get there, it then's like, I'll never get there. It's hopeless, and it goes into that trauma. It's been running away from that trauma of hopelessness, and then it falls from one side, I am going to get there, to I'm not going to get there.